The last 6 months of my mother's life were measured in spoonfuls of broth and the quiet hiss of an oxygen machine. My name is Clara, and for 27 weeks my world had shrunk to the four walls of her bedroom. A space that smelled of lavender-scented laundry soap and the sharp, clean scent of rubbing alcohol. I'd sit in the worn armchair by her window, the one with the faded chintz flowers, and read to her from her favorite poetry books. Her hand, now a delicate thing of paper-thin skin and pale blue veins, would rest in mine, her grip surprisingly firm, as if she were holding on not just to me, but to the world itself. She was a woman of quiet strength, my mother, Eleanor, and in those final days, her strength was a flickering candle I desperately tried to shield from the wind. "You've always been the strong one, Clara," she whispered to me one afternoon, her voice raspy, the effort tiring her. "Even when you didn't know it, I've made sure you'll be taken care of." Her eyes, cloudy but focused, found mine. "The key to my old writing desk. It's for you. You'll know when." Her words hung in the still air, a promise I didn't yet understand. It was a stark contrast to the phone calls from my sister Lisa. They were infrequent, and always tinged with a brittle cheerfulness that never quite reached her eyes. Her conversations were like stones skipping across the deep, dark water of our reality, never daring to sink in. They always, eventually, circled back to the same thing. "So, how's Mom's nest egg holding up with all these medical bills?" she'd ask. A casual question laced with a surgeon's precision. I'd give her a vague answer, and the subject would change, but the question would linger, tainting the air long after she'd hung up. Lisa made one final whirlwind visit a week before the end. She swept into the quiet room like a summer storm, all bright colors and loud sympathy. She fussed over Mom, fluffing her pillows with too much force, and taking a series of selfies. "For the memories," she'd chirped, angling her phone to get them both in the frame. My mother's tired face, a stark contrast to Lisa's practiced, somber pout. Later, when she thought I was in the kitchen, I heard her ask Mom where she kept her bank statements, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. When the end came, it was peaceful. The candle finally flickered out in the quiet of a pre-dawn Tuesday. I was there, holding her hand as she took her last, gentle breath. The grief was a physical weight, a shroud that settled over me, muffling the world. I called Lisa. She arrived 2 hours later, her wails echoing in the silent house. A performance of sorrow so loud and grand it felt utterly hollow. She threw her arms around me, her sobs shaking her body. But her eyes, when they met mine over my shoulder, were sharp and calculating, and in that moment, standing in the stillness of our shared loss, I felt a tremor of unease, a cold premonition that the battle for my mother's life was over, but a battle for her legacy was just about to begin. The funeral was a blur of black dresses, murmured condolences, and casseroles left on the porch. I moved through it all like a ghost in my own life, the shroud of grief so thick I could barely see the path in front of me. 3 days after we laid our mother to rest, Lisa called what she termed a family meeting. The family, of course, was just the two of us. I found her in Mom's living room, standing by the fireplace as if she were the lady of the manor. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and designer jeans, a stark contrast to the somber quiet of the house. The air was still thick with the scent of wilting lilies, but Lisa seemed immune to it. "Thanks for coming," she said, as if I hadn't been sleeping in my childhood bedroom down the hall for the past week. She gestured for me to sit on the sofa, the one where Mom and I used to watch old movies. Lisa didn't sit. She paced, a general surveying her new territory. "I know this is hard," she began, her voice taking on a tone of practiced solemnity. "But Mom was a practical woman, and she'd want us to handle her affairs quickly, to not let things drag on." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "That's why I wanted to share this with you now. To be transparent." From a ridiculously expensive-looking leather satchel, she produced a single sheet of paper. It wasn't the thick, cream-colored cardstock of legal documents. It was standard printer paper, stark white and flimsy. She laid it on the polished mahogany coffee table between us. "Mom and I had a talk a couple of weeks ago," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. She had a moment of real clarity. She wanted to make a small adjustment to her will. I picked up the paper. It was a codicil. Or at least, it was titled as such. The text was brutally simple, typed in a standard font that felt cold and impersonal. It stated that in light of her impending passing, Eleanor Vance wished to amend her last will and testament to bequeath the family home, located at 18 South Battery, Charleston, and its entire contents, along with the full balance of her primary investment account with Vanguard, to her youngest daughter, Lisa Marie Vance. My name wasn't mentioned. A cold dread, sharp and distinct from the dull ache of grief, began to spread through my chest. I read it again. The language was clumsy, not at all like the precise way our mother spoke and wrote. At the bottom was her signature. It was her name, but it was frail, spidery, and seemed to tremble on the page, as if written by a hand not entirely in control of its own movements. Beside it was a notary's seal and a signature I'd never seen before, a messy scrawl belonging to a J.D. Holloway. "She wanted to make sure I was taken care of," Lisa said softly, finally looking at me. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of sympathy. "She knew you were always the responsible one, Clara. You have your career, your savings. She worried about me. She wanted to make sure her more financially vulnerable daughter was secure." The words were a slap in the face. Financially vulnerable. She made it sound like a disability, not the direct result of years of reckless spending, of chasing a lifestyle funded by credit cards and fleeting whims. I looked from the shaky signature back to my sister's perfectly composed face. "This doesn't seem right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Mom never mentioned this to me." And her signature? Lisa's face hardened instantly. The mask of sorrow dissolved, replaced by a flinty defensive anger. "What are you trying to say, Clara? That I'm a liar? That our mother didn't know her own mind?" "I'm just saying it's unexpected," I managed, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. "We should talk to Mr. Abernathy. He's handled all of Mom's affairs for 30 years. "Oh, of course," Lisa scoffed, throwing her hands up in a gesture of pure theater. "Let's drag everything out with lawyers. Let's turn Mom's final wishes into a legal battle. Is that what you want?" Her voice grew louder, sharper. "I knew you'd be like this. I knew it. You think because you were the one here at the end, that gives you some special claim." "That's not what I'm saying," I protested. But she was on a roll. Her words like machine gun fire. "Isn't it? Were you hoping you'd get it all, Clara? A little prize for sitting by her bed?" The cruelty of the question stole the air from my lungs. She had taken the most sacred, painful experience of my life, holding our mother's hand as she slipped away, and twisted it into an act of selfish greed. She was weaponizing my love, my devotion, turning it against me. The grief I had been holding at bay for days came rushing back, a tidal wave of pain and shock. And now, a stinging, venomous betrayal. I felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt, the scent of the lilies suddenly cloying and suffocating. I couldn't fight her. Not now. I didn't have the strength. I was a soldier on a battlefield with no armor and no weapon, facing down an enemy who knew every single one of my vulnerabilities. I placed the single sheet of paper back on the coffee table. The paper cut. It was just a simple document, but it had sliced through the fragile peace of my mourning, drawing the first drop of blood in a war I didn't even know had been declared. "Fine, Lisa," I said, my voice flat, defeated. I stood up, needing to escape the room, her presence. "Whatever you say." I walked out of the living room without another word, her triumphant smirk burning into my back. As I climbed the stairs to my old room, the one with the faded floral wallpaper and the view of the garden, I closed the door and leaned against it, my body shaking. The tears that came weren't just for my mother anymore. They were for the sister I had just realized I'd never truly had. The numbness of my grief was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. My mother's signature was wrong, Lisa was lying, and I was not going to let her get away with it. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and in the barren ground of my sorrow, it began to take root. Lisa didn't give the grief in the house a moment to settle. She moved with the frantic energy of a smash-and-grab robber. My phone began to buzz before Mom's sympathy casseroles were even cold. The first text came at 7 a.m. the day after our meeting. "Have you called the investment firm yet? We need to get the paperwork started." An hour later, a link to a high-end real estate agency in Charleston. "These guys are the best. Aggressive. We could have the house on the market by Friday." Voicemails followed, each one more insistent than the last. "Clara, it's me. Again. The realtor needs to schedule a photographer. Are you even getting my messages?" Her voice was a grating whine of entitlement, the sound of a person who has never been told no. She was trying to create a whirlwind of activity. A storm of urgent tasks designed to sweep me along and prevent me from thinking too clearly. But her frantic speed was having the opposite effect. It felt wrong, desperate. Grief is a slow, heavy thing. Lisa was treating it like a deadline. That evening, as I sat in the profound quiet of my mother's study, surrounded by her books and the faint scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea, Lisa's pressure became a catalyst. My eyes landed on the antique cherry wood writing desk in the corner. It was a beautiful piece, a gift from my father to my mother on their 10th anniversary, filled with a lifetime of letters, bills, and memories. The key to my old writing desk? "It's for you, you'll know when." My mother's voice was as clear in my head as if she were standing behind me. This was the moment, the when. I pulled open the top drawer, the one that was always kept unlocked, and rummaged past old checkbooks and bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. There, at the very back, was a small, ornate brass key. It felt heavy in my palm, a solid piece of the past. I used it to unlock the deep bottom drawer, a section of the desk I hadn't opened in years. It slid open with a soft, woody sigh. Inside, resting on a stack of my old report cards, was a small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a drop of my mother's favorite dark green wax. My name was written on the front in her elegant, familiar script. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a message sent from the other side of the veil, a final piece of her careful planning. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. There were 2 items inside. The first was another key, smaller and more modern, attached to a simple tag that read, "First National Bank, Box 714. The second was a single sheet of her personalized stationery, folded in half. I opened it. The note was short, but every word was a bulwark against Lisa's storm. "My dearest Clara, the truth is safe. Don't let the noise fool you. I trust you, and only you. All my love, Mom." Tears welled in my eyes. But these were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of profound, aching love. The note was an anchor. It was permission. It was a call to arms. The noise, that's what Lisa was creating. A loud, distracting, meaningless noise to cover the sound of her theft. My mother had seen it coming, and she had trusted me to find the truth. The next morning, I didn't answer Lisa's calls. I let them go to the void. Instead, I sat in the study, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, and made my first move. I looked up the number for Abernathy and Sons, the law firm that had handled our family's affairs since before I was born. "Mr. Abernathy, it's Clara Vance." "Clara, my dear girl," his voice was warm, a familiar sound from a more stable time. "My deepest condolences. Your mother was a remarkable woman, truly one of a kind." "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. That means a lot. I'm calling because I have a question about her will." "Of course, anything. I have it right here. We can schedule a reading whenever you and your sister are ready." I took a deep breath. "My sister, Lisa, has presented a codicil, one that was signed about 2 weeks ago." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence was more damning than any words could have been. "A codicil?" he finally asked, his voice now sharp, stripped of its earlier warmth. "Clara, I haven't spoken with your mother about her will in 5 years. She would never make an amendment, especially one of substance, without consulting me. She was far too meticulous. Who is the notary? A J.D. Holloway, I said, the name feeling foul in my mouth. Never heard of him, he said flatly. This is highly unusual, highly irregular. Do not, under any circumstances, sign anything or agree to any course of action until I've seen this document. Do you understand? I understand, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I wasn't alone in this. That night, after a dozen more unanswered calls from Lisa, I sat at my laptop, the house dark and silent around me. The quiet no longer felt sad. It felt purposeful. It was the quiet of a library, a place for research. I typed, J.D. Holloway, Notary Public, Charleston, South Carolina, into the search bar. The first results were standard, a business listing, a professional services page. But then I dug deeper. I found a link to the state licensing board. And there it was, a public record of disciplinary action. J.D. Holloway's license had been suspended for 90 days just last year for failure to properly verify identity on financial documents. A crack in the facade. My heart beat a little faster. This was more than just a stranger. This was a man with a history of professional misconduct. I kept digging, moving from public records to the murkier waters of social media. His professional pages were sterile, but his personal profiles told a different story. He liked boating, expensive restaurants, and country club golf tournaments, and as I scrolled through his tagged photos, my breath caught in my throat. There, in a picture from a charity gala 6 months ago, was J.D. Holloway, a drink in his hand, his arm slung around the shoulders of another man, a man I recognized from Lisa's own frantic posting. It was her boyfriend, Mark. His smile was predatory, the smile of a man who saw the world as his for the taking. The caption read, "Closing big deals with my man J.D." I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, satisfying snap. This wasn't just Lisa being greedy. This was a plan, a coordinated, premeditated deception, executed with her boyfriend and a corrupt notary while our mother lay dying. The first cracks in the facade had given way to a gaping hole, and I could finally see the ugly, writhing truth behind it. My grief was still there, a constant companion, but now it was joined by something else, a cold, hard, and righteous anger. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was just getting started. The First National Bank was a monument of old-world money, a granite fortress of hushed tones and polished brass. Walking into the vault felt like entering a sanctuary, or a tomb. A stern-faced bank employee with a nameplate that read, Mr. Davies led me into a small, private viewing room after retrieving box 714. The room was sterile and silent, furnished with only a small table and 2 chairs. He placed the long metal box on the table, gave a stiff nod, and closed the door behind him, leaving me alone with my mother's final secrets. The box was surprisingly heavy. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my reflection a wavering ghost on its metallic surface. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. There was no clutter inside, no random collection of old bonds and forgotten jewelry. There was only one item, resting on a bed of dark blue velvet. It was a thick, leather-bound portfolio, the kind lawyers use for documents of immense importance. The dark brown leather was soft and supple, and my mother's full name, Eleanor Vance, was embossed in gold leaf on the cover. It smelled of leather and integrity. I lifted it from the box and placed it on the table. It felt substantial, a direct and physical contradiction to the flimsy single sheet of paper Lisa had waved in my face. I untied the silk ribbon holding it closed and opened the cover. The first page was a simple title sheet, The Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Vance. Beneath it, in smaller letters, were the date 5 years ago and the name of the firm, Abernathy and Sons. My breath hitched. This was it. The truth. I turned the page. The legal language was dense, but my eyes scanned the formal text, searching, and then I found it. Halfway down the first page, a paragraph that stood out as if written in fire. I hereby appoint my beloved daughter, Clara Ann Vance, as the sole executor of my estate. In this capacity, she is granted full and unrestricted authority to act on behalf of the estate, to inventory its assets, to pay its debts, and to distribute its property in accordance with the terms laid out herein. Sole executor. The words seemed to lift off the page, shimmering in the silent room. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the edge of the table. Power. My mother had given me all of it. A quiet, unassuming librarian from North Charleston was now, in the eyes of the law, the absolute authority over our family's entire legacy. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Lisa, with her cheap forgery and her loud demands, had no idea she was a queen ruling over a kingdom of dust, while I held the keys to the entire real empire. I forced myself to keep reading, my hands now steady. The will was a masterclass in my mother's meticulous nature. It began with the assets Lisa knew about the house on South Battery, the Vanguard investment account. But it didn't stop there. An appendix, referenced in the main body, detailed the rest. My eyes widened as I read. A portfolio of municipal bonds, managed by a private firm in Charlotte, worth a staggering amount. A deed to a small cottage on Lake Jocassee, a place my parents had loved but which Lisa had dismissed as a shack in the middle of nowhere. And finally, a detailed, itemized list of her collection of first-edition novels, rare works by Faulkner, Hemingway, and Welty, stored in a climate-controlled unit, an asset Lisa, who hadn't read a book since college, would never have even thought to look for. The scale of it was breathtaking. Practical woman who reused tea bags and patched her own cardigans, had quietly amassed a fortune. She had built a fortress of security, brick by careful brick, over decades. Then I saw the clause, the single paragraph that was both a shield and a sword. The will stipulated that the net value of the estate, after all debts and expenses, was to be divided equally between her two daughters. 50-50. Even in her foresight, she had been fair. She had still loved her reckless, selfish child. But the clause that followed was the masterstroke. My executor shall have sole discretion over the timing and method of all distributions and sales of estate assets. This authority is absolute and is intended to ensure the long-term preservation of the estate's value and the fulfillment of my wishes. I read it twice. It meant I could control everything. I could sell the house now or in 10 years. I could liquidate the bonds or let them mature. I could hand Lisa a check for her full share tomorrow, or disperse it in small controlled increments for the rest of her life. My mother had handed me a shield to defend her legacy, but she had also handed me a leash to put on my sister's greed. At the very bottom of the safe deposit box, beneath the velvet lining, was one last envelope. The same cream-colored stationery as before. This one was thicker. I opened it and unfolded the letter. It was several pages long, all in my mother's hand. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And I am so sorry to have left this mess for you to clean up. Please know, I never wanted this to be your burden. A mother is supposed to protect her children, but sometimes, she must choose which child is to be the protector. I have watched your sister for years. I have seen the good in her heart choked out by a desperate need for more things, more attention, more validation. It is a hunger that will never be filled. I fear the man she is with, Mark, only feeds that hunger. He does not love her. He loves the idea of her, the access she might one day provide. I knew they would try something like this. I saw the way Lisa looked at my things, not with sentiment, but with the eyes of an appraiser. Giving her control of the estate would be like giving a child a lit match in a library. She would burn it all down for a moment of warmth, and be left with nothing but ashes. And she would take you down with her. And so, I am placing my trust, my legacy, and our family's security entirely in your hands. It is an unfair thing to ask, I know. You have always been the responsible one, the quiet pillar, And your reward is one last heavy responsibility. But you are the only one I trust to be wise, to be fair, and to be strong. Protect our family's legacy, my dear. Protect what your father and I worked our whole lives to build. I am so sorry to place this burden on you. I folded the letter, my tears spotting the ink on the page. The weight of her words, of the portfolio on the table, of the truth itself, settled onto my shoulders. It was heavy, it was immense. But as I sat there, in that cold, silent room, I felt it shifting. It wasn't a weight that would crush me. It was the weight of plate mail, of a shield, of a helm. It was the weight of purpose. My mother had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't a burden. It was a suit of armor. And I was finally ready to go to war. I left the bank and drove straight to Mr. Abernathy's office. The leather portfolio resting on the passenger seat like a silent, powerful ally. His office was a sanctuary of order and tradition, smelling of old books and lemon polish. He greeted me with a grave expression and led me into his personal study. A room lined floor to ceiling with law books that seemed to stand as silent witnesses. I didn't speak at first. I simply placed the portfolio on his vast mahogany desk and opened it to the first page. He adjusted his reading glasses and leaned forward, his eyes scanning the text. A long, slow breath escaped his lips, a sound of profound relief. He read the entire document, all 20 pages, turning each one with a quiet reverence. When he was finished, he removed his glasses and looked at me. His eyes filled with a mixture of admiration for my mother and a simmering fury on my behalf. "This," he said, tapping the portfolio, "is Eleanor. Meticulous, intelligent, and always 3 steps ahead. This is an ironclad legal document, Clara, perfectly executed." He then gestured to the flimsy paper I had also brought, Lisa's supposed codicil, which now looked like a child's forgery next to the real thing. "And this," he said with utter contempt, "is an insult. It's a desperate, clumsy piece of garbage." "I know," I said softly. "She thought you would just roll over," he mused, his anger growing. "She preyed on your grief, on your good nature. The audacity is astounding." He stood up and began to pace in front of the window overlooking Charleston's historic district. "We can challenge this immediately. We file the authentic will with the probate court, present evidence of forgery, and this fraudulent codicil will be nullified before it's even entered into the record. We can pursue criminal charges." The idea was tempting. A swift, brutal counterattack. But I thought of my mother's letter, of her wish to protect the family legacy, not to have it splashed across court records and local gossip columns. I remembered her sadness, her plea for me to be strong. "No," I said, and Mr. Abernathy stopped pacing to look at me. "Not yet. A public fight is exactly what Lisa wants. It would be noisy, messy. She would play the victim, paint me as the cruel, greedy sister. You know how she is. She thrives on drama." He considered my words, a slow nod acknowledging the truth in them. "What do you suggest, then?" "My mother's note told me not to be fooled by the noise," I said, feeling a new confidence solidifying within me. "I think we should let Lisa make all the noise she wants. Let's give her the silence she can't stand. Let's give her nothing to fight against. Let her think she's winning." A slow, shrewd smile spread across Mr. Abernathy's face. He understood immediately. "Give her enough rope," he murmured, the old saying taking on a sinister new meaning. "She'll build her own gallows." "It's a brilliant strategy, Clara. Cunning. Your mother would be proud." "So what's our first move?" I asked. "Our first non-move," he corrected with a glint in his eye. "I will act entirely on your authority as executor, but no one else will know it. I will contact the registrar and the investment firm. I will place a temporary legal hold on the house and the Vanguard account, citing a pending administrative review of the estate's filings. It's a standard bureaucratic procedure. It's slow, it's frustrating, and it's completely opaque. It will drive her absolutely insane." The call from Lisa came less than 24 hours later. I was in the kitchen, packing up my mother's china, When my phone screamed to life, I let it ring twice, took a deep, calming breath, and answered. "What did you do?" she shrieked. Without so much as a hello. Her voice was a shrill, panicked weapon. "The realtor just called me. She said there's a legal hold on the house. The investment advisor said the same thing about the account. This has your name written all over it." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, keeping my own voice level and calm. "Hello, Lisa. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you lie to me," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You called a lawyer. You're trying to steal my house, our mother's house. After everything I've done, I'll sue you for everything you have, Clara. I'll drag you through the mud for years." The threats were hollow, the accusations a perfect mirror of her own actions. It was almost fascinating to listen to. "Lisa," I said, my voice deliberately soft and reasonable, "I didn't place a hold on anything. I just asked Mr. Abernathy for a review, to make sure everything is handled properly according to Mom's wishes. Isn't that what you'd want too?" My calm was like gasoline on her fire. "Properly? You think this is proper? I have plans, I have deposits to make. You're doing this out of spite, because you're jealous. You've always been jealous of me." The line went dead as she hung up on me, the final, frustrated act of someone who had lost all control. I set the phone down, my heart pounding, but a grim smile touched my lips. The net had been cast. The first thrash of panic had been felt. That night, I began my real work. My grief was still a constant companion, a shadow in the corner of every room. But now it had a purpose. It was the fuel for a cold, meticulous fire. I was an archivist by trade, a keeper of records and a seeker of buried truths. I would build a case against my own sister with the same dispassionate precision I used to catalog historical documents. I started with her texts. I screenshotted every one of them, the abusive, the threatening, the manipulative, and saved them in a dated and time-stamped file. "You'll regret this. Mom would be so ashamed of you. Just wait until my lawyer calls you." They were the frantic scribblings of a cornered animal. Next, I created a timeline. I started from the day of my mother's death and documented every one of Lisa's actions. The production of the codicil, the hiring of the realtor, the frantic calls, the illegal attempt to sell Mom's possessions. Facts. Cold, hard, and irrefutable. Finally, I delved into the why. It wasn't just greed. I knew it was something more desperate. Late into the night, in the quiet of my mother's study, I used a public records search service I had a subscription for through my work. I started with Mark, her boyfriend. He had a string of failed businesses and 2 recent tax liens. Then I searched for Lisa. The picture was even uglier. She had 3 maxed-out credit cards, all in collections. A personal loan from a high-interest lender was in default. And the final piece, a notice of impending repossession for her luxury SUV. The down payment on her Miami condo she'd been gloating about wasn't a victory lap. It was a desperate bid to stay afloat. I printed every document, every record, every threatening text message, and placed them in a simple, elegant binder. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into the study, I looked at the file I had created. It was a complete and damning portrait of desperation and deceit. The motive was no longer a suspicion. It was a proven fact, laid out in black and white. Lisa wasn't just trying to get rich. She was trying to outrun a tidal wave of debt, and she was willing to desecrate our mother's memory to do it. The net was woven, its threads made of lies, threats, and financial ruin, and my sister, my beautiful, reckless, noisy sister, was swimming right into it. To Lisa, the legal hold was not a wall, but a hurdle, an annoying bureaucratic obstacle put in her path by a jealous, pathetic sister. I could almost hear her rationalizing it to Mark, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's just Clara being Clara. She has to make everything difficult. A week, maybe 2, and her little lawyer will tell her she has no standing. Then we cash out." Her arrogance was a shield against reality. Believing she had already won, she saw no reason to wait. The first sign was a discreet ad on a local marketplace website. High-end estate furnishings. Private sale. There was no address, only a contact number. Lisa's number. My blood ran cold. She was bypassing realtors and estate agents, opting for a quick, under-the-table cash grab. She was liquidating our childhood. I knew I had to see it for myself. I needed proof. The following Saturday, I put on a pair of sunglasses and a simple scarf over my hair. Hoping to look like just another bargain hunter, I drove a rental car, parking 3 blocks away and walking the rest. As I approached the house, my own home, a knot of ice formed in my stomach. A white panel van with no markings was parked in the driveway. The front door was ajar. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the stone path and stepped inside. The scene was a desecration. 2 gruff-looking men were hauling my mother's beloved Queen Anne writing desk, the very desk that had held the key to my fight toward the door. Lisa was standing in the foyer, directing them with a wave of her hand, a cash-stuffed envelope peeking from her back pocket. She didn't even recognize me. To her, I was just another anonymous buyer, invisible. I moved through the downstairs rooms, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Price tags, written in Lisa's loopy handwriting, dangled from everything. A yellow sticker on the grandfather clock that had chimed the hours of my entire life read $1,200. Firm. A red tag on the silver tea service my grandmother had carried over from England was marked $800 OBO. Strangers, collectors with cold, appraising eyes, were running their hands over the arms of my father's reading chair, opening and closing the drawers of my mother's hope chest. Every item held a memory. The porcelain shepherdess on the mantel was the first thing I ever bought my mother with my own money. The set of crystal glasses in the dining room cabinet were the ones we used for every Christmas toast. It was all just inventory to Lisa. A collection of assets to be converted into a deposit for a condo in Miami. I kept my phone in my hand, held casually at my side. As I pretended to admire a piece, my thumb would activate the camera. The discreet click of the shutter, lost in the low chatter of the room. I took a picture of the tag on the clock. A photo of the empty space on the wall where my great-grandmother's portrait used to hang. I captured an image of Lisa accepting a thick wad of cash from one of the dealers, her smile wide and triumphant. Each photo was a dagger in my own heart, but it was also a nail in her coffin. Evidence, documentation. The quiet, methodical work of an archivist cataloging the destruction of her own history. I left after 20 minutes, unable to stomach any more. As I walked back to my car, the image of my mother's jewelry box, lying open and empty on her dresser, burned behind my eyelids. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. She wasn't just stealing from the estate. She was erasing our mother, piece by painful piece. A week later, the true peak of her hubris was reached. I was at my small apartment across town, trying to lose myself in a book, when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Is this Clara Vance?" a woman's voice asked. It was warm, but laced with concern. "It is. Who's this?" "Clara, it's Martha Gable. From next door to your mother's place, Mrs. Gable." A lovely woman who had been friends with my mother for 40 years. They'd exchanged cups of sugar and neighborhood gossip over the back fence for my entire life. "Mrs. Gable, of course. Is everything all right?" "Well, dear, that's what I was calling about," she said, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "I don't want to be a busybody, but there's quite a commotion over at Eleanor's house tonight. Your sister is throwing a party." I closed my eyes. Of course she was. "A party? A big one," she confirmed. "There are cars parked all the way down the block, loud music. I can see lights flashing from my kitchen window. It doesn't feel right, dear. Not in that house. Not so soon." "No," I agreed, my voice tight. "It doesn't. I wouldn't have called," she continued, "but I was in my garden earlier, and I couldn't help but overhear your sister. She was on the patio with that young man of hers, Mark. Laughing, she raised her champagne glass and said something. Well, it struck me as odd." "What did she say, Mrs. Gable?" I asked, my pen already poised over a notepad. "She said, 'To us, and to finally getting what I deserved all along. It sounded so entitled, so cold. It didn't sound like Eleanor's daughter at all. The line went quiet for a moment. Mrs. Gable had just handed me a corroborated first-hand account of Lisa's motive and mindset. A perfect bookend to the evidence I'd gathered at the sale. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. "This is more helpful than you can possibly imagine. Would you be willing to write down what you heard? Just for my records? For you, dear?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "Eleanor would have wanted me to look out for you." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, the distant sounds of the city a low hum. I pictured the scene next door. Strangers dancing in my mother's living room, spilling drinks on her carpets, their laughter echoing in the rooms where I had learned to walk. Lisa, queen for a night, celebrating her victory on the desecrated grounds of our family's memory. I walked over to my desk and pulled out the binder. I printed a transcript of Mrs. Gable's account and added it to the back. The file was growing thicker now, heavier. It was no longer just a collection of documents. It was the story of a crime, told through receipts, photographs, and the words of a good neighbor. Lisa, in her breathtaking arrogance, believed she was untouchable. She had no idea that every move she made, every boastful word she uttered, was just another thread in the net I was weaving around her. While Lisa was busy burning through the cash from her illicit sale, likely on designer bags and expensive dinners with Mark, I was engaged in a much quieter, more constructive activity. My days were spent with Mr. Abernathy, methodically executing the first official duty of an executor, conducting a full appraisal of the estate, while my sister was focused on the obvious, glittering prizes. We were delving into the quiet, hidden depths of my mother's world. We brought in specialists. A stern-faced woman from a Charleston auction house was hired to appraise the first edition book collection. I met her at the climate-controlled storage unit, a place I never knew existed. As she donned white cotton gloves and gently lifted a signed first edition of The Sound and the Fury from its case, her eyes widened. "My goodness," she breathed. "Your mother had an incredible eye." The final appraisal for the books alone came in at a figure that made me sit down. It was more than the value of the precious silverware Lisa had sold for a pittance. Next came a financial analyst from Charlotte to review the municipal bond portfolio. He spoke in a language of yields and maturity dates. But the conclusion was simple. My mother, over 40 years, had quietly and patiently built a fortress of stable, tax-free wealth. It was the opposite of Lisa's philosophy, slow, steady and invisible, yet immensely powerful. When the final numbers were tallied, the truth was staggering. The hidden assets, the books, the bonds, the cottage were worth nearly double the combined value of the Charleston house and the Vanguard account. Lisa, in her mad, greedy scramble, had been fighting tooth and nail for the lobby, while my mother's real treasure was hidden in the vault. She was trying to steal a painting, oblivious to the gold mine hidden in the walls behind it. A week later, I knew I had to see the cottage. I needed to understand that part of my mother's legacy. I drove the 2 hours into the upstate, the city falling away to be replaced by rolling hills and the deep green of the Sumter National Forest. I followed my mother's handwritten directions, found a small gravel turnoff, and there it was. It was not a shack, as Lisa had called it. It was a simple, perfect cabin, nestled in a grove of old pine trees, overlooking the sparkling blue-green water of Lake Jocassee. It was built of dark, weathered wood, with a wide stone chimney and a porch that begged for rocking chairs and glasses of sweet tea. It was the physical embodiment of peace. Using a key from my mother's desk, I opened the door. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of cedar, dust, and thyme. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon light slanting through the windows. It was simple inside a large main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 tiny bedrooms. But it was filled with us. On the mantelpiece was a framed photo of my father, grinning, holding up a string of fish. On a bookshelf was my favorite childhood copy of The Secret Garden, its spine soft and worn. In a large cedar chest at the foot of one of the beds, I found what felt like the heart of the place. A stack of old photo albums. I sat on the floor, the scent of cedar filling my senses, and opened the first one. There we were. Me, a gangly 7-year-old with scraped knees. Lisa, a cherubic toddler with a fistful of my hair. My parents, young and vibrant, laughing into the camera, page after page of summers spent at this lake. Of memories I had forgotten and Lisa had evidently discarded. This was what my mother was protecting. Not the monetary value a realtor would probably see it as a teardown on a nice lot. She was protecting this. The peace, the history, the one place our family had been. Truly, uncomplicatedly happy. She was protecting it from being sold off to fund a weekend in Miami, from being bulldozed to make way for a glass and steel monstrosity. Sitting there, on the floor of that quiet cabin, my perspective shifted. The cold, righteous anger I felt toward Lisa was still there, but it was no longer the driving force. This wasn't about punishing her anymore. This was about honoring my mother. It was about preserving the quiet, beautiful, and intelligent life she had so carefully built. A life Lisa couldn't even begin to comprehend. My resolve, which had been forged in anger and betrayal, was now tempered with a profound sense of love and duty. Tucked at the bottom of the chest, beneath a pile of my mother's hand-knitted Afghans, I found them, a stack of 5 leather-bound journals. Her journals. For a moment I hesitated, feeling like an intruder. But then I remembered her letter, the trust she had placed in me. I needed to understand. I opened the one from 10 years ago. An entry from a summer evening read, "Lisa brought a new young man home today. He has a flashy car and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. She was so desperate for my approval, so eager to show him off. It breaks my heart. She thinks happiness is something you can buy and display, like a new handbag. I worry for her so deeply. All that light inside her, and she uses it only to chase shiny, empty things." I flipped forward a few years. Another entry, this one written in the winter, the ink slightly blurred as if from a tear. "Clara called today. She spent an hour telling me about a new archival project at the library. Her voice was so full of passion. She finds joy in the quiet work of preserving the past. Sometimes I think I gave birth to 2 different species of human. One who builds, and one who takes. How can 2 children who grew up in the same house, with the same love, be so fundamentally different? I pray that Lisa finds her way, but I fear her appetites will one day consume her." The final entry I read was from just a year ago, not long after she was diagnosed. "The talk with Abernathy today was difficult but necessary. The will is structured to protect the legacy, but I fear it will feel like a betrayal to Lisa, and it places such a terrible weight on Clara. My steady, quiet Clara. She has never asked for anything but has given everything. I must trust her to understand. I must trust that she is strong enough to carry this, to protect our history from her sister's chaotic present. It is the only way I can rest." I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. The full picture was complete. This wasn't a last-minute decision or a fit of pique. It was the culmination of a mother's decade-long, heartbreaking worry. She had seen the storm coming and had spent years building a seawall, not of anger, but of careful, loving foresight, and she had named me its keeper. Sitting in the silent, sun-drenched cabin, I felt the last of my hesitation fall away. This was my purpose now. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance, I was defending a legacy. The binder sat on Mr. Abernathy's desk, a simple 3-ring binder that contained the totality of my sister's deceit. It was thick now, filled with page protectors holding printouts of bank records, screenshots of abusive text messages, my discreetly taken photos from the illegal estate sale, and a notarized statement from my mother's kind neighbor, Mrs. Gable. It was a dossier of greed, a meticulous archive of a crime. I had finished my work. Mr. Abernathy turned the final page and closed the cover with a soft, definitive thud. He looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of grim respect. "Clara," he said, his voice low and serious, This is one of the most comprehensive and damning collections of evidence I have ever seen a private citizen compile. It's irrefutable. So, what happens now? I asked, my own voice steady. The weeks of quiet, methodical work had burned away my grief-stricken hesitation, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. Now, he said, a flinty look in his eyes, we stop weaving the net. Now, we pull it closed. He swiveled in his high-backed leather chair and began to type. I watched as the words appeared on his large monitor, a formal, legal summons taking shape. He chose his words with the precision of a watchmaker. It wasn't a friendly invitation, it was a command performance. Couched in the ironclad language of the law, the letter was addressed to Miss Lisa Marie Vance and Mr. Mark Renshaw. Including Mark was Mr. Abernathy's masterstroke. He is a co-conspirator, the lawyer had explained. He is a party to the fraud. He needs to be in that room, so he can't later claim ignorance or that your sister acted alone. We will have them both together, under oath if necessary. The letter summoned them to the offices of Abernathy and Sons the following Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning for the purpose of, as he wrote with a certain theatrical flair, the final reading and official distribution of the assets pertaining to the estate of the late Eleanor Vance. He knew exactly how Lisa would read those words. She would see final and distribution and believe her payday had arrived. She would think the bureaucratic hold had been lifted and her flimsy forgery had been accepted as truth. He was baiting the trap with her own greed. He printed 2 copies on the firm's heavy, watermarked stationery, signed them with a flourish of his fountain pen, and slid them into crisp, professional envelopes. I'll have these sent by certified courier this afternoon, he said. They'll each have to sign for it. There will be no question that they were properly summoned. I went home and I waited. The silence in my mother's house was different now. It was no longer a silence of loss, but a silence of anticipation. It was the deep, profound quiet before a storm. The call came 2 days later. I was in the garden, pruning my mother's rose bushes, when my phone rang. Lisa's name flashed on the screen. I took off my gardening gloves, wiped the sweat from my brow, and answered, "Well, well, well," she sang, her voice dripping with smug, victorious glee. "I just got the most official piece of mail from your stuffy old lawyer. Looks like your little delay tactics are finally over, Clara." I said nothing, letting her savor what she believed was her triumph. "I have to hand it to you," she continued, a condescending laugh in her voice. "You really did try to drag this out. But you can't fight Mom's final wishes. The law is the law." The irony of that statement was so thick I could have choked on it. Mark and I just put in our offer on the most incredible condo in South Beach. It has an infinity pool overlooking the ocean. We're closing next month. She paused, letting the image hang in the air. A final, cruel twist of the knife. "So you'd better get ready to hand over the keys to the house, sis. We'll have the movers there by the end of the month. You'll be out by then, won't you?" I looked out over the garden, at the vibrant pinks and reds of the heirloom roses my mother had tended for 30 years. I thought of the lake cottage, the quiet dignity of my mother's journals, and the weight of the leather portfolio in Mr. Abernathy's office, all her noise, all her frantic, greedy scrabbling. And she had missed the entire point. She had missed everything that truly mattered. A profound calm settled over me. There was no anger left, no pain. There was only the quiet certainty of the coming reckoning. "Are you even listening, Clara?" she snapped, her good mood faltering at my silence. I said, "We're coming for the keys." I took a breath, the scent of roses filling my lungs. My voice, when I spoke, was flat, calm, and as cold as the bottom of a well. "I'll see you there, Lisa." I arrived at Mr. Abernathy's office 10 minutes early, a habit born from a lifetime of being the responsible one. He greeted me in the lobby and led me to the main conference room. It was an imposing space, exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits with my parents. The walls were paneled in dark, rich mahogany, lined with shelves of leather-bound law books that seemed to absorb the sound and lend the room a heavy, solemn gravity. A long, polished table, so shiny I could see my own tense reflection in it, dominated the center of the room. Mr. Abernathy gestured for me to take a seat on the side facing the door, and placed a glass of ice water before me. "Are you ready, Clara?" he asked, his voice soft. I took a sip of the cold water and nodded. "I am." Lisa and Mark arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. A power move they must have thought made them look important. They swept into the room not as people attending a legal meeting, but as celebrities arriving at a premiere. Lisa was wearing a sharp white pantsuit, an outfit of pure victory, and oversized sunglasses she only removed once she was seated. Mark, in a suit that was just a little too tight and too shiny, swaggered behind her, his arm possessively on the small of her back. They looked smug, impatient, and utterly convinced of their own brilliance. They took their seats opposite me, a faint, condescending smile playing on Lisa's lips. She looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture she was about to have removed. Mr. Abernathy entered, closing the heavy doors behind him with a soft, definitive click that seemed to seal us in. He sat at the head of the table, placing two identical leather-bound portfolios before him. He surveyed the room, his gaze resting for a moment on each of us. A silent, commanding presence. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and resonant, filling the quiet room. "Thank you for being here. We are gathered today to execute the true and final will of Eleanor Vance, dated May 14th, 2020. He paused. The date, I knew, was significant, but Lisa, in her arrogance, missed it completely. She simply nodded. A tight, eager little gesture, as if prompting him to get on with it and hand over her prize. Mr. Abernathy picked up one of the portfolios and slid it across the polished table toward my sister. It moved with a smooth, heavy grace, coming to a stop directly in front of her. Lisa's triumphant smile faltered for the first time. She frowned, her eyes darting from the thick, professionally prepared document to my face and back again. This wasn't the single, flimsy sheet of paper she had brought to our mother's house. This was something else entirely. Something serious. "What's this?" she asked, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "More paperwork? This," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice even, "is your mother's will." He opened his own copy, cleared his throat, and began to read. He skipped past the preamble, the standard legal declarations, and went straight to the heart of the matter. "I hereby appoint my beloved daughter, Clara Ann Vance, as the sole executor of my estate," he read, his voice clear and unwavering. "In this capacity, she is granted full and unrestricted authority to act on behalf of the estate." A sharp, strangled gasp escaped Lisa's lips. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in a mask of pure shock and disbelief. "What?" she shrieked, jumping to her feet so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "What is this? That's not right. This is fake. Mom changed her will. I have the codicil. She signed it." Mark placed a hand on her arm, trying to quiet her. But his own face was a canvas of confusion and dawning panic. Mr. Abernathy did not even look up. He held up a single, placating hand without missing a beat in his reading, a silent dismissal of her outburst that was more effective than any rebuke. He simply continued as if she hadn't spoken, his calm completely unshakable. "The assets of my estate are to be inventoried as follows," he read on, his voice a steady, relentless drone of truth. He started with the things they knew. Item 1. The residence located at 18 South Battery, Charleston. Item 2. The Vanguard investment portfolio, account ending in 7,742. Lisa began to relax slightly, a look of smug relief replacing the panic. Perhaps she thought this was just a formality before her own document was produced. She sat back down, exchanging a confident glance with Mark. Item 3. Mr. Abernathy continued, turning a page. The portfolio of municipal bonds held with the firm of Blackwood and Finch in Charlotte. Lisa's head snapped up, her brow furrowed. "The what?" she mouthed silently. Item 4, he went on, his pacing deliberate, relentless. The property and cottage located at 114 Shoreline Drive, Lake Jocassee. Mark, who had been leaning back in his chair, slowly sat forward, his shiny suit crinkling. His eyes darted between Mr. Abernathy and Lisa, a flicker of doubt, of fear, entering his expression. "And item 5, the lawyer said, pausing to look directly at them for the first time. "The collection of first edition literary works, a full and detailed catalog of which is included as Appendix C of this document." The color drained from Lisa's face. It was a visible, shocking transformation. The rosy, confident glow vanished, replaced by a pasty, sickly pallor. She looked as if she had been slapped. She stared at Mr. Abernathy, her mouth slightly agape, the gears in her mind grinding to a halt as she tried to process the information. A cottage? Bonds? Rare books? This wasn't a simple pot of gold she had been fighting for. It was a treasure chest, and she hadn't even known it existed. The realization hit them both at the same time. A silent, devastating explosion in the quiet, wood-paneled room. The full, staggering scope of their ignorance and their greed was suddenly laid bare. They had launched a war for a single province, completely unaware of the vast, wealthy continent that lay just over the horizon, and in that moment they knew, with a dawning, sickening horror, that they had already lost. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Lisa sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief, while Mark's gaze flickered nervously between his girlfriend and the lawyer, the gears of his opportunistic mind grinding, trying to calculate a new angle, a new escape route. He was finding none. Mr. Abernathy let the silence hang for a long moment, allowing the full weight of the real will to settle upon them. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he pushed the portfolio containing my mother's true will to the side, and reached for a second, much simpler binder. My binder. He opened it, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from one of shocking revelation to one of impending doom. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a cool, clinical tone, "regarding the document you provided, Miss Vance. The codicil." He spoke the word as if it were something distasteful he had found on the sole of his shoe. "You claimed your mother had a moment of clarity when she signed it, that she was of sound mind and body. We looked into that." He slid the first page from the binder's protective sleeve and placed it in the center of the table. "This is a sworn and notarized affidavit from Miss Patrice Holloway, your mother's primary hospice nurse for her final 2 months." His eyes, cold and hard as river stones, locked onto Lisa's. "On the afternoon you claim this document was signed," Nurse Holloway states, and I quote, "Mrs. Vance was heavily medicated for pain management. She was disoriented, frequently drifting in and out of sleep, and was, in my professional opinion, not lucid enough to comprehend, let alone legally execute, any financial or testamentary documents." Lisa flinched as if he had struck her. "That nurse is a liar," she spat, her voice thin and reedy. "Mom was fine that day. She was tired, but she was clear. She knew what she was doing." Mr. Abernathy completely ignored her, as if she were a buzzing fly. He simply replaced the affidavit with a second document. "Perhaps," he said dryly, "but her hand, it seems, did not. This is a report from a Mr. David Chen, a forensic handwriting expert with 30 years of experience. He compared your mother's signature on the codicil with over a dozen verified samples from the past 5 years." He let his gaze drift to Mark, then back to Lisa. "His conclusion is, and again I quote, the signature on the codicil exhibits significant tremor and a lack of fluid penmanship inconsistent with the subject's established writing patterns. Key letter formations show marked deviation, suggesting the hand was either heavily guided or the signature is a freehand forgery. In short, he has staked his professional reputation on the fact that your mother did not sign this document of her own free will. If she signed it at all, that's ridiculous. He's just some hired quack," Lisa protested, but her voice was losing its conviction, replaced by a rising tide of panic. Mark was now sitting ramrod straight, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He looked at Lisa, his expression no longer one of support, but of dawning horror and accusation. "And then," Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice relentless, There is the matter of the notary, a Mr. J.D. Holloway. He slid a third set of papers onto the table. Bank statements. We subpoenaed the records for the notary in question, and for you, Mr. Renshaw. Mark visibly paled. He looked like he was about to be sick. Funny thing, the lawyer mused, tapping a highlighted entry. The day after this fraudulent document was notarized, Mr. Holloway received a wire transfer of $5,000. The source of that transfer? An account belonging to you, Mr. Renshaw. I suppose it's just a coincidence that you and a notary with a history of professional misconduct are such good friends? Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. No sound came out. He was trapped. The connection was made. The conspiracy laid bare. It wasn't just Lisa's word against mine anymore. It was a documented, paid-for crime. But of course, Mr. Abernathy said, his gaze now falling on me with a flicker of empathy before turning back to my sister. The fraud did not end there. He began to lay out the contents of my own methodical investigation. He placed the first photo on the table. It showed my mother's grandfather clock with a yellow price tag stuck to its face. He followed it with another. The empty space on the dining room wall where our great-grandmother's portrait had hung. Your sister, acting as executor, was able to document the numerous heirlooms you sold for cash in what you termed a private sale. We have photographs, and we have receipts from the buyers, who were more than happy to cooperate to avoid being charged with receiving stolen property. He then slid a printout of Lisa's own social media page across the table. It showed a picture of her and Mark, champagne glasses raised, on the deck of a rented yacht. Her own words were highlighted in yellow, clearing out some of Mom's old junk to make way for the new. Number goodbye clutter, number hello future. Lisa made a small wounded sound in the back of her throat as she saw her own careless, cruel words presented as evidence against her. Her arrogance, her need to brag, had become a key exhibit for the prosecution. The room was utterly silent, the only sound the faint rustle of paper as Mr. Abernathy squared the stack of evidence into a neat, damning pile. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, and his voice lost all its formal legal tone. It was now the voice of judgment, cold and final. What you have done here, he said, looking from Lisa to Mark and back again, is not a simple family dispute. Let me be very clear about the legal jeopardy you are both in. He began to tick the points off on his fingers. 1. Felony forgery, for the creation and presentation of a fraudulent legal document. 2. Financial elder abuse, for exploiting a vulnerable, terminally ill woman for monetary gain. And 3. Grand theft, for the illegal sale of estate assets to which you had no legal claim. He let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. These are not civil infractions. These are criminal charges, the kind that come with press coverage, hefty fines, and significant prison time. That was the moment Mark broke. The fantasy of the Miami condo and the life of easy money evaporated, replaced by the cold, terrifying reality of a jail cell. His instinct for self-preservation, reptilian and absolute, took over. He recoiled from Lisa as if she were radioactive, shoving his chair back from the table. Prison? He sputtered, his eyes wide with terror. He pointed a trembling finger at my sister. This was all her idea. I didn't know anything about the will being fake. She told me it was what her mom wanted. She said she was just protecting her inheritance from you, he yelled, looking at me, his face a desperate plea for an alliance that would never come. She told me her mom had these moments of clarity, he continued, his voice rising in hysteria as he threw her completely under the bus. She said the nurse was just an idiot who didn't understand their family. $5,000? That was a loan. She said she needed it to pay off a bill. I had no idea it was for a notary. This is all on her. Lisa stared at him, her face completely shattered. The man who had whispered promises of a shared, luxurious future, the man for whom she had committed these crimes, was not just abandoning her. He was actively trying to push her off the cliff to save himself. The betrayal was absolute, the final pillar of her fantasy world crumbling into dust. Their toxic, greedy alliance, the one that had fueled this entire nightmare, had just spectacularly imploded in the sterile quiet of a lawyer's office. I watched the ugly, pathetic implosion of their partnership, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, not even satisfaction. It was like watching a building demolish itself. A collapse that was inevitable from the moment its foundations were laid on greed and deceit. Lisa was now curled in on herself, her body racked with shuddering, gulping sobs of pure despair. Mark was still babbling, a frantic litany of self-serving excuses and accusations. His face slick with sweat. Mr. Abernathy simply waited. He sat at the head of the table, a paragon of patience, his hands steepled before him, allowing the toxic storm to blow itself out. When Mark's tirade finally wound down into choked, wheezing breaths, the lawyer's voice cut through the thick, miserable air. "Are you quite finished, Mr. Renshaw?" he asked, his tone dangerously quiet. Mark just stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Mr. Abernathy's gaze then shifted to my sister. "Miss Vance, I suggest you listen closely. I have not yet concluded the reading of your mother's will." Slowly, painfully, Lisa lifted her head. Her face was a wreck, her expensive makeup streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. A tiny, pathetic flicker of hope seemed to ignite in their depths. Perhaps there was a loophole. Perhaps there was something left for her to grab onto. Mr. Abernathy turned back to the portfolio. "As I stated," he said, his voice returning to a formal, measured cadence, "your mother's will dictates that the net value of the estate, after all debts and final expenses, is to be divided equally between her two children, 50-50. The words hung in the air. Lisa's sobbing hitched. I saw her mind working, the frantic calculations of a drowning person spotting a piece of driftwood. Even with the hidden assets, half was a fortune. Half could still get her the condo, the life she wanted. Mark, too, seemed to latch onto this, his panicked breathing steadying slightly. But Mr. Abernathy hadn't finished. He held up a hand before either of them could speak. "However," he said, and that single word was a death knell, "the will contains a specific and binding provision attached to that division." He looked directly at me, then back at Lisa. "As executor of the estate, Clara Vance is legally directed and empowered to subtract from your share, Miss Vance, the full appraised market value of any and all assets removed from the estate without the executor's consent prior to the final distribution. This includes, but is not limited to, the sterling silver tea service, the grandfather clock, various pieces of antique furniture, and the entirety of your mother's personal jewelry collection." He paused, letting the financial reality sink in. "Furthermore," he added, his voice like chipping ice, "the executor is directed to subtract from your share the full cost of all legal fees, appraisal costs, and professional services incurred in the process of identifying and remedying this fraud." He gestured to the pile of evidence on the table, to himself, to the very room we were sitting in. "In essence, your half of the inheritance will be used to pay back the other half for what you stole, and to pay for the cost of proving you stole it." The flicker of hope in Lisa's eyes died, extinguished completely. The driftwood was a mirage. She wasn't just losing, she was being forced to fund her own defeat. The fortune she had been desperately calculating had just vanished, reduced to a fraction of its size by her own actions. But my mother's final act was not about the money. Mr. Abernathy turned to the last page of the will. His voice softened, losing its hard, legal edge, and taking on a tone of somber reverence. He was no longer just a lawyer reading a document. He was a friend delivering a final, painful message. "Finally," he said, "your mother included a personal clause, a binding directive regarding the remainder of your portion of the estate, Miss Vance." He took a deep breath before reading. "Any remaining inheritance due to my daughter, Lisa Marie Vance, shall not be dispersed to her directly. Instead, it shall be placed into a revocable trust, to be administered by the executor, my daughter, Clara Ann Vance." Lisa stared at him, uncomprehending. "A trust? Managed by me?" It was the ultimate statement of my mother's faith, and a final, crushing vote of no confidence in my sister, Mr. Abernathy continued reading from the will, his voice now filled with my mother's own. The funds of this trust are to be used exclusively for two purposes: to engage the services of a certified debt counselor to manage and resolve her outstanding financial liabilities, and to pay for long-term psychological counseling with a therapist approved by the executor. He looked up from the page, his eyes finding Lisa's. The will is explicit, Lisa. You cannot touch the principal. You cannot use it for a down payment, or a car, or a vacation. It can only be used to help you get well. And then came the final, devastating blow. The words that were not about law, or money, or property, but about the fractured, aching heart of a mother. It is my desperate final wish, Mr. Abernathy read, his voice thick with emotion, that my daughter Lisa finds peace not in possessions but within herself. That was the moment Lisa truly broke. It wasn't a shriek of rage or a cry of self-pity. It was a low, guttural wail of pure, unadulterated pain. The sound of a soul being stripped bare. Because this wasn't the act of a vengeful mother. It wasn't a punishment. It was an act of profound, heartbreaking, disappointed love. My mother hadn't written her off. In her final days, she had been thinking not of how to punish her daughter, but of how to save her. She had looked past the greed and the lies and had seen the broken, hungry thing at the center of it all. This trust, this final plea, wasn't a cage, it was a lifeline. Thrown to a daughter she knew was drowning. It was a final, crushing blow, not because it was cruel, but because it was so deeply, achingly kind. It robbed Lisa of her last defense, the narrative that she was the victim of a cold, unloving family. The truth, laid bare in that room, was so much more painful. She was the beloved daughter of a mother who saw her flaws with perfect clarity and, even in death, was still trying desperately to heal them. The chaos in the conference room subsided into a thick, miserable silence, punctuated only by Lisa's ragged, watery gasps. Mark was gone. He had scrambled out of the room the moment Mr. Abernathy mentioned prison, not even bothering to grab his coat, a rat deserting a sinking ship. He didn't look back once. Mr. Abernathy had a paralegal quietly escort Lisa to a small, private office to compose herself, leaving the two of us alone amidst the wreckage. The leather-bound portfolio of my mother's real will sat on one side of the table, a symbol of truth and order. On the other side, the binder of evidence I had compiled sat like a monument to a painful, necessary war. She will have to sign a series of documents, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice weary but firm, acknowledging the validity of the primary will, relinquishing any claim based on the fraudulent codicil, and agreeing to the terms of the trust. If she refuses, I will have no choice but to forward this file to the district attorney's office. He tapped my binder. Given the evidence, and Mr. Renshaw's inevitable testimony against her to save his own skin, they would prosecute vigorously. I looked at the closed door through which my sister had disappeared. I pictured her future. A life defined by court dates, public shame, and the cold, hard reality of the consequences she had brought upon herself. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of savage satisfaction. She had earned it. But then, I thought of my mother. I thought of her journals, of the love and worry that filled every page. A public trial wouldn't just humiliate Lisa. It would drag our mother's name, our family's private pain, into the harsh glare of public spectacle. Her final, desperate plea for her daughter to find peace would become a sordid headline. No, I said, the word tasting of finality. No charges. Mr. Abernathy looked at me, his expression unreadable. She's lost everything, I continued, my voice finding its strength. She's lost Mark, she's lost her home, her reputation, and any shred of dignity she had left. Her inheritance will be consumed by the debts she has to pay back. She is financially ruined and utterly alone. That is punishment enough. My mother's memory deserves to rest in peace, not in a courtroom. He held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow, respectful nod. That is an act of profound mercy, Clara. An act of grace I am not sure she deserves. It's not for her, I said quietly. It's for my mother. The weeks that followed were a blur of methodical work. As executor, I moved through the tasks of settling the estate with a quiet efficiency. The trust was established, and a professional debt counselor was engaged. I watched, with a kind of clinical detachment, as the majority of Lisa's diminished inheritance was vaporized, paying off years of reckless spending, the credit cards, the defaulted loan, the final payment on the repossessed SUV. What little was left would be managed by the trust. A small, steady allowance for therapy and basic living expenses. It was not the glamorous life she had envisioned. It was a life preserver, not a lottery ticket. I heard through a third party that she had moved to a small town in Georgia, seeking anonymity. We did not speak. With my own half of the inheritance, I did not buy a new car or a bigger house. I did what my mother would have done. I paid off the mortgage on my small, quiet apartment. I met with a financial planner who helped me structure a retirement plan that guaranteed I would be secure for the rest of my life. The feeling was not one of excitement, but of profound, quiet relief. It was the feeling of a heavy weight I never knew I was carrying being lifted from my shoulders. Then, I did something for me, and for her. That spring, I booked a flight to Rome. I spent 3 weeks in Italy, a trip my mother and I had dreamed of taking together since I was a little girl. I walked through the soaring halls of the Vatican. I stood before Botticelli's Venus in Florence. I ate gelato by the Trevi fountain, and with every step, I felt her with me. I would see a beautiful piece of art and imagine the quiet, intelligent way she would have analyzed it. I would taste a perfect bite of pasta and almost hear her sigh of contentment. It was a pilgrimage, a bittersweet journey of shared dreams fulfilled by a soul survivor. I left a single, perfect Charleston rose on a stone bench in the Boboli Gardens, a final goodbye in a place she would have loved. Back home, I turned my attention to the rest of her legacy. The lake cottage I kept, it was my sanctuary, a place of peace and memory, untouched by the greed that had poisoned the rest of our family. It was not an asset, it was a part of my soul. The rare books, however, were different. They were a testament to my mother's intellect and passion, and I knew they were meant for more than sitting in a climate-controlled vault. With Mr. Abernathy's help, I arranged for them to be sold through a prestigious auction house. The proceeds were, as expected, substantial. But I never saw it as my money. It was hers, and it had a purpose. We used every last cent to establish a charitable foundation in her name, the Eleanor Vance Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding adult literacy programs and providing books to underprivileged communities across South Carolina. Her love of the written word would now be a gift passed on to countless others. That, I knew, was a legacy that would truly last. The final piece was the house on South Battery, the beautiful, stately home that had been the primary object of Lisa's desire. It held too many ghosts for me, too many fresh wounds. It was time to let it go. I could have listed it on the open market and started a bidding war, but I had a better idea. I called Mrs. Gable. She and her husband had lived in their smaller home for 40 years, always admiring my mother's house from next door. I offered it to them in a private sale, for a price that was fair but well below the aggressive market rate. The day we closed the deal, I met her on the porch. I handed her the old, heavy brass keys. Her eyes filled with tears. "We will be good stewards, Clara," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "We will honor Eleanor's memory in this house." "I know you will," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled a real, uncomplicated smile. I walked away from the house, from the life I had known, without a single look back. I had not just settled an estate, I had transformed a painful inheritance born of conflict and betrayal into a future of security, peace, and quiet purpose. The justice had been served, and now, at last, so had the mercy. It's been a year since the reading in Mr. Abernathy's office. I'm writing this from the porch of the lake cottage, a place that has become my anchor. The late afternoon sun is filtering through the tall pine trees, casting dancing patterns on the weathered wooden planks. A gentle breeze is coming off the water, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It is quiet here. It is peaceful. And it is mine. Looking back, it's strange what stands out. The pain of my sister's betrayal, which I thought would be the defining scar of that time, has faded. It has been replaced by a quiet, deep understanding. I've come to realize that the hardest part of it all wasn't the fight with Lisa. It wasn't the lies or the theft or the ugly screaming rage. The hardest part was the moment I opened that safe deposit box and felt the immense, terrifying weight of my mother's trust settle onto my shoulders. She had trusted me not just with her fortune, but with her truth, with her legacy, with the final desperate act of a mother trying to save a lost child, fulfilling that trust, carrying that weight with the same integrity she had lived her own life. That was the true victory. It was a victory measured not in dollars gained, but in a promise kept. I have not spoken to Lisa. Mr. Abernathy's office informs me that the trust is functioning as intended. A portion of her debts have been settled, and a therapist has been engaged. I received a single, curt email from the counselor confirming that Lisa had attended her first 2 sessions. I have no idea if she continued. I hope she did. I hope, without much optimism, that one day she will find the peace my mother so desperately wished for her. But her path is her own now. I have finally, truly, let it go. They say the best revenge is living well. I suppose that's true. I have a life of quiet joy, of purpose and security, that Lisa's frantic greed could never have bought. But sometimes, the most profound vindication comes not from revenge, but from quietly, meticulously, and relentlessly executing justice. My mother's true inheritance wasn't her money. It was the faith she had in me to protect her truth. And I did not let her down. Thank you for listening to my channel. If you have a story of justice you think we should hear, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of karma served cold.